part of what drives any type of struggle with addiction or is isolation. And so one of the first steps is to move out of isolation. Part of that's through accountability, talking to someone else about what's going on, finding someone else to hold you accountable. Maybe it's a face-to-face accountability, or it's also an online accountability like Saavi offers. Um, I think that accountability is really important, especially early on. I think they also there's typically with someone who's struggling, there's a real difficulty in identifying emotions and accessing the part of yourself that's a little more softer and a little more tender and vulnerable. And I would say one of the exercises that someone can do very early on is to do emotional journaling. I think I tell some of my guys that in like their first thoughts, like journaling. Oh my gosh, I grew up with my little sister journaling in her little pink binder, and I don't want to do that. But I think it's more about a sort of a reflective process, putting yourself in a reflective position to keep yourself aware of what's going on inside of you, to give yourself clues as to the ways that you're feeling and thinking, because a lot of the times addiction is part of just a numbing out process, so you don't have to feel all those things. And so I think it's important to be able to start identifying those things and to feel them and to purge them and to talk about them, even if it's with a close friend or a neighbor or a parent. So it's not sort of kept up inside, because the more it's kept inside, the more painful it becomes, and it sort of multiplies itself inside, and then it can turn into something that's as powerful enough to drive you towards a mood-altering experience like addictions, gambling, or whatever else it might be. So being self-aware, exploring yourself, understanding the ways that you feel, and then expressing those to somebody else is a healing process. There's a Swedish proverb that says, joy shared is double joy and sorrow shared is half sorrow. And so the idea is taking your sorrow, taking your joy, sharing it with somebody else so that it can be cut in half so you don't have to carry such a big burden. And people that struggle with isolation or addiction, it's really hard for them. They don't really understand what it means to make meaningful contact with someone else or to create intimacy. And one of the things I encourage them to think about is that the world can't really relate to our stars and trophies. That we can look at them from afar, but what the world can relate to and what my neighbor can relate to and what my friend can relate to is my brokenness, because they're broken too. And when I talk about my brokenness, they can say, oh yeah, I get that. And it may not be specifically related to gambling, but certainly anybody you talk to has experienced a failure. Anybody you talk to has experienced some sadness or some fear. And so I think by sharing that with them, they get a glimpse into your soul and therefore feel more connected to you. Even if it's something you're ashamed of, it's very upside down than what our culture talks about. Our culture wants us to think that we need to carry around our stars and trophies and will only be liked if we show these things off. And I think it's very different. Those people end up being more isolated, maybe admired, but isolated, where the people that are able to be broken and share those parts of themselves that they're aware of because they've been reflective end up finding that they create more close, intimate relationships with other people. And they feel more connected to their community and to their world. And connection and lack of isolation is a natural antidote to healing from sexual addictions and other types of addictions. Patrick Carnes talks about recreational users, which are folks that seem to dabble in it maybe once a month, maybe once every month or two. It's usually they're at their computer. Boredom is one of the most common noted reasons as to why folks get caught up into looking at it during times of boredom. And so it's usually during time of boredom that they'll be sitting at their computer and they'll have a compulsion to look, or they'll run across, a news ad that talks about, the Playboy Mansion is being sold by so much, and so it sparks a thought, and then they end up going to the Playboy page, and then they get going deeper, and then they're like, oh, why did I do that? And they come back, and they don't tend to come back that week or later that day, or and so they really feel shame. And so this is more the recreational user where kind of basic accountability can be really useful. When you move into addiction, it's almost as if you feel like I'm no longer in control. I can no longer say no. I set a plan out for myself to say no, and I don't. I get into that moment, the dopamine starts rushing, my prefrontal cortex shuts down, and so I lose the capacity to put the brakes on, and I don't put the brakes on, and then I act out, and then it's after I act out that I come back to my senses, and I realize what I've done, but I stay in that cycle over and over again. And it's really also to the point where the behavior, whether it's gambling, whether it's sexual addictions, whatever, becomes the means in which to manage stress in life. You don't have alternative means to do that. Conversations with friends or working out or something else like that. You use this as your primary means in which to manage your anxiety, to manage your sadness, to manage your stress, and it creates that mood-altering experience. And you find yourself being so captivated and preoccupied with it. It could be that in relationships, you're with your partner, and all you can think about is the next time you're going to engage in sex. And so if they rub up against you, you're thinking, is that a cue that we're going to have sex tonight? It doesn't allow you to be present with the person, to pick up on all the other parts of the experience that can be a part of a very healing, life-giving relationship. You're so preoccupied with those thoughts and those images and getting your next fix, and so it distracts you from being engaged in relationships. It distracts you from playing with your kids. It distracts you from, and so it becomes more of a focal point of your life. And there's a lot of sort of clinical definitions, that I could go over, but that's kind of the basics of what it feels like. You just feel like it's getting out of control. Like you no longer can control it. Though I think the trick, for longer than it should be, is the fact that I can control this. I think it's part of the lie, is that I can somehow step in and stop this thing from happening. But if you look at the movie of the past month or year, and you see how it's played itself out, from the outside you'd say, well, this is someone who's not in control of their addiction, or not in control of their compulsions. And that's I think it's a really scary thing to say to self, I'm addicted. I think that's, especially if someone who's never been addicted to anything, that's a really helpless feeling.